she definitely made implications that she had concerns about her safety, and the condition of their relationship had I think deteriorated quite a bit over the last several years. And my sister and I we were not sisters who frequently talked daily or even.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. That was the voice of Suzanne's sister Melinda with the Heart of the Rockies radio, I think interviewed by Terence West, and I'll put a link to the full interview in the description. There's actually more to say regarding what she talks about in terms of how close she was to her sister. We'll deal with that in a minute. In this episode, we're going to deal with the scale of the cancer mountain that Suzanne had to kind of scale. We want to look at the scale and scope of the second cancer scare. Now, if the timeline in the article that I'll also put a link to that in the description from Fox 21, if the timeline is accurate, Suzanne actually had cancer during their move from Indiana to Colorado in the fall of 2018. Would you want to move house, move state in the middle of fighting a terminal illness? And not for the first time, for the second time. Before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. Thank you to the 100 or so people who've subscribed since the last video. And let's get started. So at about 2 minutes 35 into the SoundCloud clip, you hear Suzanne's sister Melinda talking about the marriage deteriorating. I must say, when I first heard this, I didn't really think too much of it. I mean, you could almost say, obviously in retrospect, the marriage was deteriorating given the end result. But one's got to be careful being cynical and not paying attention to what family members said, because at the end of that part of the conversation, she talks about receiving a kind of quite a emotional text from Suzanne on Friday night, I believe, which was just before she disappeared. It was the night before she disappeared on, well, I guess the night before she disappeared, right? And the other part that I think is worth talking about, and I say this with kindness, compassion, and sympathy, and I'm certainly not a person to point fingers and say, well, you're not as, I don't know if the word is close, but you're not as, and I don't know if the word is connected either, but you're not as in touch with your sibling or your family member as perhaps is not appropriate, but is ideal, or is is one would have hoped for, put it that way. And I say that because I'm not often in contact with my siblings. They don't live too far from me, but we live sort of pretty separate lives. And I think, and the point I'm going to make in a moment has to do with if you aren't in regular contact with other people and you disappear, is anyone going to notice? And is that going to figure into the premeditation of the person that, I won't say that she's in the custody of, but she's certainly in the care of, in the sense that she had cancer to some extent, but, in terms of her spouse being a dominating figure, she was certainly, to some extent, should have been under the care and protection of her spouse, right? I've got to say, again, just to personalize this and to show that I'm not trying to blame anyone here, when I went on a holiday recently, and when I came back, after I'd been back maybe a week or two, I had a conversation with my father, and he didn't even know I was away. So if I had to disappear, I don't know how soon people would know. There was a time when I was writing books where I didn't want to be disturbed, and if I disappeared then, I don't know if anyone would have known any better. So I'm certainly not one to cast stones. I do want to compare this case to the Patrick Frazee case, in the sense that Kelsey Bereth had also transplanted, I believe, from California, and was close to her mother, but they weren't in contact every single day. And so I think she'd been missing for something like 10 or 11 days. And after that period, the family, well, her mother and her brother, I believe, flew to Colorado, and then actually stayed. They didn't know it, but they were actually staying in the crime scene, which had been cleaned up. And I think after about a day or so, her brother noticed a slight blood smear on the bottom base of the toilet. But the point is, if you compare it to, for example, Shanann Watts, where somebody missed her within hours, it feels like this period of time that is going by is a gargantuan amount of time. I'm talking about in the Kelsey Bereth case. The other thing that is probably worth mentioning is in the Casey Anthony case, her daughter was basically missing for a month and nobody really noticed. And what that is telling you is that there's not the sort of cohesion that you would ideally have in a family, right? And because of that lack of cohesion, someone can take advantage of that in a criminal context, right? So I'm certainly not criticizing Suzanne's sister, because as I say, not everybody has fantastic day-to-day conversations with other family members or whatever it is. Some people are just different. But the fact that she wasn't in contact with her sister regularly, and not only her other people as well. And I guess that also applies to perhaps her parents, because of course one of them had died. I'm not quite sure what the status is exactly and when these dates were. I'm still trying to catch up on that part of the family history. But the bottom line point I'm trying to make is, from Barry Morphew's point of view, is he had to be thinking, if Suzanne disappeared, would anyone notice? Right? And you might say, well, wouldn't his daughters notice? Well, yes, but they were in his care, and he was able to perhaps influence them. The other side of it is, would an employer notice her absence? And the answer is no, because she wasn't working for anyone. So who would notice her absence? And if she did disappear, how long would it take for her family members to sort of catch up to what was happening? And I think the answer is that it took a little while, right? But the point is that this isolation would be something that could be utilized by a perpetrator, and it was something that a perpetrator would probably notice. How often are you on social media? How often are you on your phone? How connected are you to other people? And this is where we come into the cancer conversation, where we talk about what role did the cancer have in isolating Suzanne. Now, it's kind of in two areas. The one area is that she'd already moved from Indiana to Colorado, and so that was already isolating her from her family and friends and the fabric that she was once part of. But the cancer would then further isolate her, right? And then not only that, it was also the coronavirus. Colorado, the state of Colorado locked down on March 25th, right? So really at the end of March. So it was really something like 6 or 7 weeks later. It was a really short time into the lockdown that Suzanne disappeared. So that is the one side of the story. The other side of the story is the cancer itself. What was the scale of it? What was the context of it? and I've tried to find out a little bit of information. There's a pretty good article, once again in Fox 21, dated the 23rd of July. So 22nd of July, I guess, updated the next day, which includes a letter, I think, from, I'm not 100% sure of this. I'm not sure if it's from, I'm not sure if these are from Facebook posts, but a fellow cancer survivor apparently said, it's just not clear from the article, I'm not sure if it's both of these messages are from Amy McCurry, a childhood friend, or it's just not 100% clear. But the gist that we get from that article is that she overcame Hodgkin's lymphoma twice, and the first occasion was before her children were born, and then the second was when the family moved to Colorado. And this really sent a couple of flags up in my mind. The fact that, because I had no idea that the timing or the context of the second cancer, right? I thought it was probably sometime when she lived in Indiana, and then once she'd gotten over it, then they moved to Colorado to sort of start their new life. It's not like that at all. It's not clear also whether the cancer sort of started up once she was already in Colorado, or if it sort of started off as they were leaving. So that part is still not completely clear, but the fact is that it was coming back at the same time that they moved to Colorado. And so aside from the motive for moving to Colorado and all of that, and how that must have affected Suzanne, because you can imagine if she knew she had cancer, or even if she didn't know and she was feeling fatigued and struggling, perhaps even to some extent recognizing some of the symptoms, would you have wanted to do something like not just move home, but move to a different state? Sometimes when you're ill or fatigued, you just instinctively don't want to do certain things. You want to hold back, you want to conserve. And of course, one of their daughters was going to study in Colorado, and I think Barry wanted a change, probably wanted, things were stagnating, I guess, in Indiana on the work front, possibly. And so he wanted to get a new lease on life. Probably thought that there's probably a lot of landscaping work in Colorado, because Colorado is growing, right? So this is the part that I think is important to bear in mind, that as they moved to Colorado, simultaneous, I guess, to that, she got cancer the second time. And then she celebrated her last cancer treatment, this is very important, on the 1st of October 2019. So the cancer was, as you can imagine, the cancer was sort of present pretty much for the whole time Suzanne was in Colorado. So for Suzanne, I don't think Colorado was she may have been upbeat and positive, but I think the whole Colorado experience for Suzanne wasn't as awesome as it was for everybody else. She would probably associate Colorado with cancer, but of course also overcoming cancer. So they moved to Colorado in the fall of 2018, and so more than a year later she was still receiving cancer treatments, and then had her last cancer treatment sort of at the end of fall on October the 1st, 2019. But it wasn't over, and that's where we go to this brilliant statement that gives you just this inside view into what was going on. What did it feel like being next to Suzanne while this was going on? And so she said, a fellow cancer survivor, she's not named, I just really would like to know who this is, she said, some days I would be in the chair next to her getting chemo. Suzanne was one of the nicest people I've met. She was cheerful and had a great attitude. She loved her daughters more than anything. And this is the part that I think is quite noteworthy. Her daughters, one or both, would always be with her for her treatments. I saw Barry come in once, and he was not overly friendly and seemed to be uncomfortable there. That is not unusual, as it's often hard for loved ones to be there. And then she talks about the last day of her treatment, so you can go and read that article. I just think it's interesting that her daughters are there for her and Barry sort of isn't. Barry comes in once, is not friendly, perhaps he's quite tense and seems to be uncomfortable. Now, why do you think that could be? And I think one area where you can definitely get a sense of the scale of the mountain, of the cancer mountain, besides the physical battle, is the financial aspect. And I've already had some people on Patreon just saying, wow, I had no idea it was this expensive. We get the sense that Suzanne was winning the sort of spiritual battle and also winning the emotional battle, just in the sense that she was positive and upbeat. You can imagine if she was depressed, she probably would need her spouse to kind of keep her spirits up. But in this case, her daughters are there, and she seems to be quite positive and having, she's kind of the master of her fate in that sense. She's beating the illness, right? I do find it really strange that there are no photos of Suzanne during this period. I haven't come across any photos of her getting treatment. And it is a bit strange. I mean, it was quite a long period. Where are those photos? Have they been deleted? Did she just not want to be photographed when she was ill? What's going on? We do actually have photos of Patsy when she lost her hair and was getting her cancer treatment. Even Shanann Watts sort of showed to some extent when she wasn't well or the children weren't well. So coming back to the scale of this mountain, specifically speaking in the economic sense, I found an article called on the website of Future Medicine, and it's specifically dealing with lymphoma, right? And I realize this isn't an exact science. I'm not saying that this article from 2018 is going to be exactly accurate, but it is going to certainly give you a ballpark, and I'll put a link to that article in the description as well. But if you scroll down the article to approximately 75% of the way through, it refers to statistics from 2015, and I understand that is 6 years ago, but it basically provides ballpark, mean, median figures, average figures for the costs of treatment, and it basically separates them into 2 years, which is exactly what I think Suzanne had, basically 2 years of treatment. The first year refers to all cause around about $11,000 or $12,000, right? And then, but you can go and look at those figures yourself. And when I looked at them the first time, I thought, well, that's not too bad. $12,000 is a lot of money, but it's not going to necessarily break the bank. But then I realized these are averages per person. Sorry, not per person. It's per patient per month. So those kind of numbers per month, and it going on for about 2 years, that's a lot of money. And it was a lot of money when I don't think the Morpheus could really afford that. When you bought a house and just bought a house and you're trying to sell another house and you've got to pay for these treatments, that is a very hard financial pill to swallow. So someone on my Patreon says that she works in that particular field. I'll probably need to get some more information from her, but she was saying that it's more like $35,000 a month. Now, I don't know how much it changes for lymphoma, and what the exact details are, but it would be interesting if we could see the financial statements. It would be interesting if we could contact the medical center where she was treated and just get a ballpark idea of what it was likely to be or what those numbers actually were. But what you can clearly see here is that the cancer brought in not only excessive expenses, but expenses at a critical time in the sort of history of the Morphew family. Bear in mind that the one daughter was going to college and the other daughter would be about to go to college as well. You can also add to that, to some extent, the impact of the coronavirus. I don't know whether that would have impacted work at all, but certainly you have the other side of the equation where Suzanne herself, when she was ill, couldn't work. So she's not earning an income on the one hand, so that amount of money is lost, and at the same time spending money, right? Also, all of these treatments mean she's not at home or she's busy dealing with her cancer, and Barry is free to be doing other things. What is he doing? What is he thinking? What is he planning? What is he wondering about? Where are the finances going? What impact is that having on Barry's mindset, on his thinking, on his is that feeding into any kind of premeditation? I think the thing that really leaped out at me from this article was the reference to her being happy on the last day of her treatment. She was still coming in for maintenance treatments, but the chemo was done and she was doing great. And this is the part that really leapt out at me, that she was supposed to come in for her maintenance the Monday after Mother's Day. And what does that tell you? It means even though she'd basically beaten the illness, she was still needing medical treatment all the way up to the day after she disappeared, meaning those expenses were there all along, right? And of course she didn't show up. It's kind of a parallel to Shanann Watts, was also supposed to go to a doctor that day and missed her doctor's appointment. So effectively then Suzanne was getting cancer treatment constantly or consistently for around 18 to 19 months when she disappeared. It must have felt to some of those around her as if it was never ending, not just the cancer but also the costs of it. And you can also kind of imagine if it was something that had recurred, right? So she'd beaten cancer when she was much younger. Now it had come back, well, and she'd beaten it again. Well, what was the chance that it wouldn't come back a third time or a fourth time, right? So wasn't that featuring in the perpetrator's thinking? What do you guys think? So just around the cancer narrative are so many aspects. There's the isolation, which is increasing. It's leading to a sense of, if nobody sees her, is anybody going to miss her, right? That aspect. There's the burden of her not working during that period. I kind of assumed she was a stay-at-home mom, but in a way, I don't know if that was by choice. And then there's also there's the stay-at-home mom thing. She's not earning an income, while at the same time, money is draining out of the family kitty. And if you think about it again, comparing just the finances to Shanann Watts, you had the husband being the breadwinner in a real sense, and then there's also so Shanann thinks she's earning an income, but she's actually not because it's MLM. And besides that, there's also the medical expenses, in this case not from cancer but from things like the pregnancy, and that was going to be a huge expense. Also the ongoing medical problems with regard to lupus, the lupus medications, and also the children's medical problems, right? And so you almost have a similar thing where the husband is thinking, "Jeepers, I can't shoulder this burden. I don't want to shoulder this burden." And I know we tend to think in a very black and white way and say, why did he, if he had an affair, why would he have an affair? She's so beautiful and she's so such a lovely person, but there's nothing beautiful about cancer. And so you might want to run away from that. You might want to run away from the cancer, from the entropy, and find a new lease on life in some other person who's healthy and unburdened by, you want to unburden yourself with someone who's not going to expect things from you, and you don't have that whole sword of Damocles hanging over you. And that may be how it starts, and then it just gets worse. You get relieved by getting relief from that, and then you want that to persist. You want to be free from that burden, how that particular person perceives the other person. It would also be interesting to get clarity on this idea of the marriage deteriorating. If you say it was deteriorating over years, well, was the move to Colorado meant to fix their marriage? Just like the Watts family having the third child, was that meant to fix the marriage, and did it work? Why was it deteriorating, right? And did much of that deterioration happen in those crucial last 2 years when they moved to Colorado, when she got cancer in those 2 years in Colorado, when the finances became critical, and all these other things also happened, including the lockdown and the difficulty selling the house in Indiana. So you can see we're starting to piece things together, and you're starting to get a real sense of tension from both parents, from both individuals, that perhaps both of them might not want to be in the marriage anymore, and for very different reasons. I have said that probably Suzanne's faith probably strengthened when she had cancer, and I don't know what Barry's faith has been like, if there was much faith to begin with, but one gets a sense that either it was not much, it wasn't genuine for quite a long period of time, but certainly at the time that Suzanne disappeared, it's hard to imagine that he was a faithful Christian man at that point. And so I do think there's a very strong relationship on the one hand between the cancer and the dynamics of the Morphews, Barry and Suzanne, and also money. I think the cancer and the money are interrelated, and that's still something we need to get clarity on, and I wonder whether we will. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about the cadaver dog alerts and kind of what to make of them. But thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, you can click on the light blue icon at the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.